All right, today we are beginning the final formal approach to your big magnum opus, your big paper. This is the first draft of your final paper. Now, in fact, your first draft may incorporate what you did with the last two assignments, which is the cross-tabulation table as well as the multiple regression model. But you're going to be changing everything because this is where you're thinking about theory for the first time. Immediately after this, we're going to start talking about how to use something that's inappropriately named because it's really smart. It's called dummy variables. So we're going to be talking about that and thinking about how you can use those, and those are really exceptionally useful for working with R and getting sort of concepts about things that are basically binary, like region, gender, race, things like that. So let's start talking about the first draft. The last assignment was one where I just wanted to see if you had the mechanics of being able to get a multiple regression model out of R and make a table out of it. That was basically all I was looking for. Now we change and we talk about theory. Now you have to actually think about what kind of model you're going to be putting in. I'm not just looking at the mechanics. Now I'm thinking about, from now on, what's in the model. And are you talking about it intelligently? This is what you really have to be able to do with statistics. Remember, statistics is not about the numbers. Statistics is about interpreting politics, interpreting society, interpreting the world. That's what statistics is about. So, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have a really good, interesting theory going into it, you're not going to have a very nice result when you come out, no matter how sophisticated the statistics are. Some of the best, most profound work in the social sciences, I'll mention an example in political science, has used extremely simple descriptive statistics. V.O. Key, great professor. Actually, he worked at UCLA, then went to Johns Hopkins. He was bounced around. He wasn't kept at UCLA. Finally, he went to Johns Hopkins, and finally, he ended up being the biggest professor on the planet Earth in political science at Harvard, making those other universities, you know, sort of say, wish we had kept him. But the point is, V.O. Key, most people just call him V.O. Key. It actually stands for Vladimir Orlansky Key. But the reality is, V.O. Key wrote incredibly important articles and books about politics that to this day people say, wow, I wish I could have done something like that. And he only used descriptive statistics. He didn't use anything fancy. Garbage in, garbage out. But the other side of that is brilliance in. Almost no matter what you do with it, it's going to come brilliance out. So this part of the assignment, this first draft, is really important because this is where you start conceptualizing what you're going to be thinking about, what you're going to be doing, and what you're going to be using the statistics for. When you get to graduate school, you will see so many graduate students overwhelmed with the power of their sophisticated statistical methodologies, getting more and more complicated to the point where most faculty members can't even understand them, to be quite honest. But when you look at the stuff that they've written about, 99 times out of 100 you say, all of that work and all of that sophistication to answer that? Like, was it really worth it? All of that sophistication, like, for what reason? It's like, it was not an important question going in, and it's not an important question coming out, no matter how much sophistication is used. So, you're my DNA now. What I want you to remember is, when you do statistics, never downplay simple statistics. They're as important as the most sophisticated. But whether you use the most sophisticated or the more simple statistics, the key is what must be in your papers, this is my DNA that I'm transmitting to you, is brilliance in theory. The theory part of it has to be brilliant. And then it doesn't matter how sophisticated the statistical stuff is. It can be the best, most sophisticated stuff in the world. But if the people in the beginning of your paper say, wow, this is a profound question, no matter how challenging your statistical stuff is that you're presenting, they're going to stay with you to the end because you raised a great question and they want to know the answer. Everyone got that? If you do that, you will be one of the very few in the social sciences that actually do that. No matter how sophisticated they are, always ask at the end of the presentation, was there anything really big in that presentation or in that paper? Almost always you'll say, not really. Not when you compare it to some of the greats in the past. It's not a matter of whether there are great questions to ask anymore. There are great questions to ask. The question is, are you going to think of those great questions going into your paper? So, this data set that we're using for this project is still underexploited. There's so much stuff that can be gotten out of this data set, for real, and published. So let's go over the instructions for the first draft. This paper helps you set up what you're going to be thinking about, what your theory is going to be about in this project. This project gives you an opportunity to apply the statistics that you are learning in class in an interesting real-world setting. You can either use one of the two data sets offered in class. There is a second data set, but I'd rather you not use that. It's just in case somebody absolutely insists on using an international relations data set. There is one for that, but I much prefer you use the survey data set because that's a type of data set you're going to be running into most commonly in your applied work later. You can either use one of the two data sets offered in class to conduct your analysis, or you can choose your own data set. Choosing your own data set is really only an option if you're an honors student and your thesis has to be done at a certain time. I've seen a lot of people drop out of an honors program, not just at Emory, but at other colleges, because they spend the first semester of the honors program learning basic stuff of how to put the research together. But then, when it comes down to actually doing it, they're actually starting to do their work in January. The thing is due in March. And if they're still collecting their data and working out basic stuff, they just simply don't get it done, and then they have to drop out of the honors program. So, for those people who are taking a statistics course in an honors program this semester, and it has to be, be ready by March, under those circumstances only, I'll say, okay, what data set are you using? And then I sort of let them morph into that. But unless any of you are in that category, I want you to use the data set I'm supplying, okay? For this first draft, you are to come up with a topic that you plan to write about. Now this is really the topic that you're going to be writing about. This thing is going to be due in a month and a half, mid-December, the last regular day of class. So this is the time where you're actually thinking about, what the heck am I going to write about? This is the time when you have to think, when you have to answer that question. You also need to identify the data set that you will use for your statistical analysis, and hopefully for all of you that's already done. The final paper project will be submitted as various drafts. The final paper should be anywhere from 10 to 20 pages. The length, as long as it's 10 or over, it'll be okay. Once you get to 20, hey, wrap it up. The issue is it's quality that really matters, not the length. So if you think, and that, sometimes you think professors say that, but it doesn't really, it's really not that true. Trust me, I've never lied to you in this class. It's true. The length is not as important as the quality. The quality is really the only thing that matters. But if you can improve the quality by adding a couple pages, so you go from 12 pages to 14 pages, by all means, do it. Okay? Quality is what matters, not length. The final version of the paper project is due on the last day of normal class. The due dates are, of course, in the syllabus, and they're going to be regular as we go along. Your first draft should be in the range of 3 to 5 pages. Now that's 3 to 5 new pages. Especially if you're going to use the cross-tabulation assignment that you've already gotten, and if you're going to modify the multiple regressions assignment that you're handing in just today, then you're going to be adding 3 to 5 pages to that. Okay? So already your paper can start to grow. You can either start over again, or you can build it upon the last 2 assignments. It should include an introduction, a discussion of the problem under investigation, a modest literature review that is relevant to the problem. Now, you should have at least 5 initial print references. Every time you hand in a version of this paper, and you're going to be doing it regularly for all of the assignments throughout now, add more references. So to start, you want 5 references. Next time, it'll be 7. Next time, it'll be 9. Next time, it'll be over 10, 12. Do you get the idea? You're adding references along the way. How do you get the references? Remember, I want you to use print references. I do not want you to use URLs. I want you to use print references. And those print references can be gotten using JSTOR. Remember I showed you how to do that? JSTOR in the library, and you search the American Political Science Review, the 3 big journals I want you to search. And I searched and I actually found some of those journals for you. The journals I want you to use is the American Political Science Review, Journal of Politics, American Journal of Political Science. There are some sociology journals as well, American Sociological Review, things like that. I've published in some of them. Those are good too, but these are the big ones. This is the APSR, JOP, and this is the AJPS. So I want you to take your references out of these journals, and they're going to be print sources. And we are all using the Chicago style of references and citations in the text. Remember I showed you how to do that? That was basically where you're referencing somebody, and then you put at the end of the thing, you put the last name, the year, and if needed, the page number, and then the references are at the back. So you do not have a bibliography. Everything is just references. Okay, using the Chicago style. Okay, now if you want an example, you can either look up Chicago style as I did for you earlier, or just pull out any recent version of any recent article in the American Political Science Review. It's all on JSTOR. Remember, you get it on the library, on your laptops. It's easy to get. So you go to the American Political Science Review and pull out any recent article out of that journal. And just look at how they do the references in the text as well as at the end. Make it the exact same format. Okay? If that's difficult, just pull out my articles, which are on my website. In my curriculum, you can look at my curriculum vitae. They're there. Also, you can look at scholarly publications. My articles are there. Click on any of those. Look at any of the articles that are printed in the American Political Science Review. I've got a whole bunch of them. Just look at how I did the references. Okay? That's the style that's the Chicago style. All right? I used to do the APA style as well as the Chicago style, and people could do either one. But that became so confusing, because then I was correcting in class people's APA style, and the people who were doing the Chicago style got confused and they started mixing. And then I would correct in the Chicago style, and the people who were doing the APA style were getting confused. Just so to make it all uniform and easy, everybody just used the Chicago style. Okay? All right, so you're going to have a introduction, a discussion of the problem under investigation, a modest literature review that is relevant to the problem from these journals, print journals, a discussion of the data to be used in the project, and a clear description of the unit of analysis. Now, most of the reference should be normal print sources such as journal articles and/or books. I say here use internet resources sparingly. I really like to say don't use them at all. Meaning, it's not terrible if you use one, but if I say, look, I've done this so many times. If I say you can use a few internet resources, I'll find 2 print references and 20 internet resources. So I don't want that. If you have 20 print references and 2 internet resources, that'll be okay. But in general, just get the internet URL stuff out of your mind. You're in the generation where everything is connected to the web. But these papers have to be ready for publication, and they have to show literature that's done in a normal scholarly way. And this is what the scholarly journals expect. And when you go to your graduate schools and you do stuff, they're going to be expecting print references as well. And internet references to be used sparingly. Okay? Now in terms of format, I have some initial suggestions. And I'm going to add these suggestions later. Now, I have gone through some of them already in class. But this is so important, I'm going to show you again just where to get the actual printout of these things. I'm going to go to the syllabus. And on the syllabus, under class requirements, you see this link? Follow these formatting guidelines carefully for all assignments. If you haven't read it in detail, read it. So this covers all of the normal stuff that I want you to go on. It goes on below that. So just make sure you have gone through all of that and understand all the different formatting issues. I've already actually talked about everything up to about, let me see, what do I'm using memory now. I think I talked about everything up till about number 10. But these basic things are, by the way, one thing I really want to emphasize, if you see LC on your paper, like I circle something that LC, LC stands for lowercase. That means you capitalize something unnecessarily. So capitalize only formal names. Okay, so if it's a formal title, like President Obama, then the word President and Obama gets capitalized because they're part of an actual name, even the President. But if you just talk about presidents in general, you don't capitalize that. Okay? It's like Presidents of the United States, you do not capitalize that. So LC just stands for the lowercase. Again, this should be obvious, but I've seen it so often. Never copy and paste repeated sentences in different paragraphs. So even if you're talking about the same thing as you were a page or two earlier, never use the same sentence to do that. I've already mentioned putting all variables and parameters in italics. This one I've also covered, I remembered in another class. Never start the sentence with a parameter or a variable. So no matter what you do, beta or a or whatever it is that's a parameter or variable, that should never start the sentence. Just come up with some other way to start the sentence. And this is important. This is what I was going to actually write on the board, so that's why I wanted to pull this up. Let me cover this last. Again, you never say compare to, you say compare with, and again, stapling everything. So let's talk about this number 18. So what you're going to need is a title page, you're going to need an abstract, and you're going to need a body of the assignment. Now we're going to talk about this more. Then you're going to need references, tables, and figures. Now all of this goes in order. Now for this particular assignment that you're going to be handing in, you may not have any references. You will have references. You may not have any tables and figures. So these may not be in this particular assignment, but in all future assignments, they're definitely going to be there. And everything must be stacked like a layer cake. So you don't cut and paste tables or figures inside. You keep them separate, all right? And you layer them afterwards. Okay, everyone all right with that? All right, so does everybody see that? All right, let's go now to this part. You're going to have a title page, staple your papers. Do not use plastic covers for your papers, just hand them in. The second page should always contain a one-paragraph abstract. Now it's true that you don't have much to summarize now in an abstract. It doesn't matter, just write something. Okay? I know your first draft will have little to summarize in an abstract, but make it a brief summary of what you do have. You will add to this in future drafts. Now place the word abstract centered at the top of the abstract page. So, the word abstract goes at the top, centered, and then one paragraph with 5 or 6 sentences goes there. Okay? The third page, again, the title page first, then the abstract, and then the third page will begin your introduction. That will be a brief statement of your research topic. Shoot for between 1 and 3 pages. Now, that's just for the introduction alone. Minimum of 1 page, and definitely don't go over 3 pages. Following the introduction will be a brief review of the relevant literature, and following this will be a discussion of your data set. So let's actually talk about how this works. The beginning of your paper does not have the word introduction. It just is the introduction. You introduce, it's the hook that gets the reader into the paper. There are 2 hooks. The first is the abstract. The first is actually the title, then the abstract, so there's 3 hooks, and then the big hook, which is the beginning of the paper. You have to actually understand what it is that you're going to be talking about, what's the theory that you're talking about, and then with that theory, you capture it in the first 1 to 3 pages. You explain what's all going on. So your very first thing is going to have to be this introduction. And you do not use the word introduction, but the introduction goes first. All right, now the very first paragraph has to be the biggest part of that introduction, the most important part. You have to summarize everything that you're basically going to be thinking about, what you're testing in that first paragraph. After that, you need a review of the literature. Now, there are better ways to write the review of the literature and to let people know that this is what's going to happen. But just to begin, hopefully by the end of the semester you'll come up with a better title. But for the beginning, after you do your introduction, you can actually have a title and just call it Literature Review. Now that's really a terrible title for a literature review. Nobody wants to read a literature review. But while you're being creative about what you're going to be talking about how you're going to be writing that, you can just call it a literature review. I won't take off any points, but I will actually show you some examples of how scholars have done the literature review section without using the word literature review. But they use some words that indicate we're going to be talking about what other people have done. So this is a section of a number of paragraphs where this is where what other people have written about this topic. That's what goes in that section. Now this can actually, in your final paper, this can actually be like 4 pages long. You're talking about what other people have done. So this is where you use your citations. Now some citations are going to actually occur in the introduction. So in the introduction you want to actually mention the biggies, the people that, like 2 or 3 people that might have raised some really interesting aspects about this question. Here you're talking about more people that have written about the topic, but maybe not so centrally focused. They're sort of expanding out. This is where your literature goes. Now this literature review, as you hand in the assignments, this literature review will grow as the semester finishes. So every time you add 2 or 3 more references, you're adding to this literature review. Okay? After that, you have to have a data section. Now this literature review is an actual title, and you can set it apart. Usually people set it apart with an extra space. This little arrow here is my notation for saying an extra space above it and an extra space below it. And some people use bold. Not everybody. It's the extra space that really makes a difference. But some people use bold to separate out that title, to say, this is that new section. All right, then after this you need a data section. Now, The same rule applies here for the data section. That's a terrible title to use for the data section, but for right now, you can go ahead and use it. Hopefully by the end of the semester, you'll come up with a better title as you look at other examples of how other people have done this. But you need an actual data section, again with a space above and a space below. This is where you actually write about the data set. You have to explain to your readers what data set you're using. Now in this case, you're using the National Election Study. It's a panel study, and it was for the United States, and it had 3 waves. Actually, it had 4 waves if you include the post-November wave. So it had 4 waves, and it was in 1980. So these are the things that you're going to need to talk about. It's a national election study. That's abbreviated for that, but you have to spell it out. For the US, it's a panel study. 4 waves. And the dates of those waves, put in the dates of the waves. Remember, the dates are January, July, September, and after the election in November. So there's 4 waves. Tell them when those waves actually took place. The N, how many people were in the survey? It's about 1,000 people in the survey. I think it's 1,009 people or something like that in the survey. And you have to tell the election. It's about Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter. Did everyone get that? And you have to explain everything that's sort of related to that. This is at least 2 paragraphs, this thing, okay? In addition, you want to talk about your variables, the variables that you're going to be using, especially the dependent variables. Now, you may only have 1 dependent variable, but you may have 2. 2 is nice, because then you're talking about Reagan and Carter, okay? Now, at this point in the course, you're talking about the fielding thermometers for Reagan and Carter as being the most logical dependent variables. But they don't have to be the dependent variables. You could be picking some other variables in there. Later on in the course, and we're not far away, just a few weeks from that, I'm going to show you how we can use a different form of multiple regression called logistic regression to enable you to use some different types of variables that have binary responses. The fielding thermometers are nice because they go from 0 to 100, so they seem like a continuous scale, so they work well with normal multiple regression. But if you have a different type of dependent variable that has only 2 responses, such as did you vote for Reagan or did you vote for Carter? Only 2 answers. You can't use normal multiple regression. You have to use something called logistic multiple regression. We're not there yet, but we will be there soon. So, but you need to mention your dependent variables. You should also mention some examples, which will change as the course continues, of independent variables. So I'm running out of space here, so let me write it here. Independent variables, okay? Now, when I say you need to mention your dependent variables and your independent variables, this directly addresses the question, the really good question that was just asked, which is how long this section should be. You don't just say fielding thermometers for Reagan and fielding thermometers for Carter. That's a whole paragraph. You have to say what are the fielding thermometers. The range of values from 0 to 100. You have to tell people exactly what that is. In fact, it's nice if you include some things like the mean and the standard deviation for those variables. You can just list those in a sentence. All right, but the basic idea is you have to describe the variables, not numerically a lot, but you have to at least say what the range is, maybe the average, what the standard deviation is. The standard deviation and the mean is optional. Any statistical stuff dealing with the variables is optional. Many scholars don't put that here in the data. But if you do decide to put that, that would be okay. You're basically just describing for the people, your readers, what data you're using. So you're talking about the study. Do I have the year here? I don't have the year. So you have to put the year here. The fact that it's a national election study in the United States, it's a panel study, 4 waves. What are those waves? What's the N? It's during the election between Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter. Your dependent variables, your independent variables. That's a lot of stuff. So you see, you can fill 2 paragraphs easy, and you can easily go to 4 paragraphs. This can easily be 2 pages, just talking about this stuff double-spaced. So you have to include all that stuff in your data section. And again, use the title Data and Literature Review for now, just to get your mind used to the idea that that's what you're going to be talking about. But before you hand in your magnum opus at the end of the semester, you're going to want to think of cooler, sexier titles to use than just Literature Review and Data. But for now, just to remind yourself while you're adding things, what goes there, feel free to use those. I will not take off because you use a boring title, but I will smile pleasantly when I get your final papers if these titles are a little more creative than just Literature Review and Data. Are we okay? Okay. Now, again, do not use a header for the introduction. So these sections actually have to have headers. The word introduction should not appear. Of course, you number all pages, 1-inch margins, normal, double space, Times New Roman font, 12 point. And let's see. Okay, Gary King. Let's talk about Gary King. Gary King's a really great methodologist up at Harvard. And he has an article here that's really nice. It actually goes through various iterations, and you can get it on his website. I think I've got a copy of it here. But let's see. All right, this is Gary's idea of how a paper should be written for a brand new graduate student. Think of yourselves, envision where you'll be. Never think of where you are, think of where you will be. And this has some really interesting ideas in it, and it's a very good discussion of how graduate students should approach. But I differ, as I do differ with a number of things dealing with Gary. There's a lot of things that he says that I sort of have a different opinion about. But this is one of those. But it does not take away from the value of his advice. It is very good and interesting advice. So this is a really good discussion of how to go about doing research and how to go about your first paper. The only thing that I want to emphasize that I differ in his approach here. And generally his approach is actually really good, which is why I want you to read it. Spend some time reading Gary King's really good advice on writing your first empirical and potentially publishable, remember this data set is not fully exploited, there's still stuff that can be gotten from it, paper. My advice generally parallels his, although I do not want you to collaborate in this project or paper. Gary comes out of a way of scientific thinking that sort of parallels the natural and physical sciences, where collaboration is a good thing. But he's also got a lot of single-authored stuff. I don't want my students to start thinking about collaboration right away. Actually, so his advice with regard to collaboration, my personal view is don't take it. It's not a good idea. I have seen too many brand new graduate students get academic jobs, and they're just too stuck in the idea, embedded in the idea of collaborating, that they don't have much single-authored stuff. And when they come up for tenure review, there's a problem, because very often the faculty says, well, let's just not look at anything that was written collaboratively with anybody else, because we don't know what that person actually contributed in that work. That's a problem. The person may have 5, 6, 7 great articles, and the people are saying, push those to the side. What else this person's written? And they're looking for something that is unambiguously well-published, good journal, good academic press, that's solely authored by that person. So, although when people talk about it, your peers, faculty members, they will talk about peer-reviewed stuff that's okay, collaborative is okay, but in the bottom line, when the doors are closed, you don't get full credit for stuff that's been collaboratively written. You just simply don't. I mean, I've been in those faculty meetings time and time again, multiple universities, multiple places. It just doesn't happen. They really emphasize the stuff that's single authored. What you should be thinking about is you should always, it's okay to have some collaborative stuff on your resume, on your vita, but it should not be the dominant stuff. You must have single authored stuff. And if you look at Gary King's resume, it's got a lot of collaborative stuff, but he's also got some spectacular single authored stuff. Nobody questions that he does have the capability to do all that stuff. So do not get stuck into the idea that collaborative stuff is good. Be bold. Have your name in lights. Be the person that has your name on that article and nobody else's name is on that article, so that everyone clearly can see this is you. Trust me, you will. And then it's okay to do some collaborative stuff later, but the emphasis that Gary King has, as I read it, which is to emphasize the collaborative stuff first, I reverse that totally. Emphasize the sole author stuff first, by a long shot, and then do the collaborative stuff because it's sort of fun. Everybody get that? Get that in your mind, never leave it. Now, some of you are probably going to go to Harvard and probably study under Gary, and he'll give you this other advice, and his advice is good too. So I'm just giving you my opinion. But that's my opinion, and I strongly feel it. So judge for yourself. You make your own decisions in your life. The other thing is that this project should reflect your own work, but it is perfectly okay to look over the shoulder of other people in your class that are doing stuff. Statistics and math is never done by itself. You're always asking people for advice. You're always asking people, what are you doing? Does everybody get it? You're always asking and sharing and stuff, but when you sit down and write your paper, make sure it's just you writing that thing. It's actually okay and advisable to interact with others during the semester, sharing discoveries and insights. If you choose to replicate someone else's findings, now that's a suggestion made by Gary King, well then that is okay, that is fine, but it is probably more appropriate if you are doing this project with the intent of using it as part of, say, an honors thesis, if you're doing the replication type of stuff. Replication is enormously helpful for students to fine-tune their skills. Now here's where I differ again from Gary King. I don't have any of my students replicating things. I don't like replication. I think replication is not a good idea for graduate students or undergraduates to pursue unless they're doing an honor thesis and they're trying to replicate something and there's a time deadline on it and it's over. Let me tell you the quick and dirty for why replication is useful as a publication strategy. Somebody's printed a journal article and the publisher has committed themselves to having it appear in their journal. You do a replication and find that the person's screwed up in some way, or you have different results. You send it into the journal. The journal's under a very difficult situation. They almost have to publish it because you're challenging it. As long as it's competently done, you're challenging something that's already in print, and that journal actually printed it. So it's really an advantage for getting your stuff in print soon, because you're engaging something that's already in print, and you're saying this should have been done this way, it was done incorrectly that way, you're causing a controversy, and that's what happens. So replication, if you're just replicating something and you find that the person did everything correctly and nothing was done wrong and everything's fine, well, do you think that's going to get published? Why should they publish that? The original study was already done. So the replication is only useful if you find mistakes, find things that were not done, or you expand upon something that somebody else did. Now, sometimes it's okay to do the replication and expansion rather than replication and criticism, but it happens both ways. But the point is, it's sort of an easy way to get a publication. So that's one of the issues about the replication advice that is in favor of replication, because you're finding something about the study that somebody else wrote about and you're changing it. And you have a sort of an easier path to publication. But I differ from Gary King. I don't like my graduate students to do that. I don't like my undergraduate students to do that, and I don't like my graduate students to do that. This is what happens. It's the difference between Steve Jobs with Apple Computer and Microsoft. Steve Jobs and Apple Computer invented new stuff. It was like incredibly good. Windows came after Apple. Stuff that Microsoft does, it's incrementally better. It's improvements with each version that it comes along. But if you want revolutions, they have come out historically, at least while Steve Jobs was alive, they came out of Apple. They didn't come out of Microsoft. Do you get the idea? So Microsoft is, in a sense, replicating and making incremental improvements to many of the ideas that started with Apple. I would rather you follow the Steve Jobs model than the Microsoft model. They're both good. They're both big companies. Do you get the idea? But I'd rather you be the new thinker coming up with new ideas. If you remember a person, you're going to remember Steve Jobs for like hundreds of years because he came up with new ideas. He wasn't a replicator. He didn't replicate anything. He came out with new stuff. Think of yourself that way. So, replication is enormously helpful for students that want to fine-tune their skills, but the best scholars eventually come up with their own ideas from scratch, so to speak. And I must admit, Gary King, for all of his talk about replication, is a great pioneer for coming up with new ideas. So he didn't become the scholar that he is because he was replicating other people's studies. He became the scholar that he is because he was going through forests and building new highways. He wasn't repaving someone else's old highway. All right, so you gain a lot when you try to do this early on, meaning if you're going to try to imitate Steve Jobs in the sense of coming up with new ideas, don't wait until you're 30 to begin. You're in the prime now. People say you become in your prime when you're 30 and 40. Bull. You're in the prime now. You are the masters that are going to take over this planet. Begin acting like that now. Remember, if you are creative now, you will be creative then. If you are not creative now, don't expect it to turn on when you're 30, 40 years old. Start now. Remember that all scholarship, replication or otherwise, is based on prior research that has been conducted by others, so there is a lot of similarity between replication and other more fully original work. So you learn either way. And so while Steve Jobs was pioneering new things, he was still using the basics of electronic circuit board design and things like that. So you still build in to your original work stuff that's already been done by others. All right. Notice with this assignment that there are no tables, there's no figures. So this is a thinking assignment. Now you can have, if you want to include normally what would happen is after this data section, you have a new section called results. And that's what we cover in the next assignment, the results, where you actually have your tables, your multiple regressions, your cross-tabulation tables, and so on. So if you are basing your stuff on the earlier assignment where you did cross-tabulation tables and the multiple regression, you're really just talking about taking that stuff. You're talking about taking some of the introductory text parts of that and refiltering it so it fits into this type of format. So it's the beginning of a new paper. You're not just using it verbatim, but you're cutting and pasting paragraphs to fill into these things and then expanding those ideas. Your actual multiple regression results that you just handed in and the cross-tabulation table that you handed in earlier, they're not needed for this assignment. But a lot of the text that you have in those previous assignments may be useful for filling in this. After this assignment, we are going to start putting in results, and they'll have a results section, and then you're going to start filling in your tables and stuff. Okay? Now, since this assignment does not depend on multiple regression analyses or cross-tabulation tables, there's no empirical analyses that are going on in this assignment, you can do it over the weekend. This is the only exception in the entire class where normally I say you must wait until I give you back an assignment before you actually hand in your next. But there's nothing in the current assignment that this assignment is going to be dependent on. So this one, I'd like you to hand in on Tuesday. I'll hand you back the assignment that you just handed in. This one, the one that you just handed in now, I'm just checking to see if you've got a table, if it's nicely formatted, if the multiple regression worked, stuff like that. Remember, I wasn't expecting a lot of theory to be in that assignment. From now on, we're going to start putting theory in. So this assignment I want you to work on over the weekend, and it's not a long assignment, you know, but it's just text, thinking about what you're going to be writing about. The topic. Does everyone get it? Let me ask at this point. I want to make sure everybody understands what to do. This is literally the first few pages of your final big project, where you're just talking about the topic. You're not putting in statistics, no tables, no multiple regression, no anything. It's just a thought. And if you want to see some ideas about that, for example, that I have published on this data set, I have an article that you can get in here under scholarly publications or my curriculum vitae that actually use this actual data set in an article that was published in the American Political Science Review with Mike McEwen. That was my only co-authored piece, ever. Everything I've done besides that has always been single-authored. Okay? That's a good sort of balance. A lot of people have 9 co-authored pieces and 1 single-authored piece. Reverse it. 9 single-authored pieces and 1 co-authored piece. That's the better balance, in my view. Other people will differ. Gary King, I'm sure, will differ. And that's not wrong. It's just a different opinion, a different perspective of how to proceed. Okay? All right, I'm done with this. Can we move on to dummy variables? Are you okay? You'll hand it in on Tuesday? Good.